that just the NDE experience might change someone's life.
Yeah, there's actually been 2 good prospective studies in which there were cardiac arrest survivors. Most, of course, did not have a near-death experience, but a number did. And these researchers followed the 2 groups longitudinally over a period of many, many years. In both studies, they found that there may be some life changes in people that had a cardiac arrest, in other words, survived a life-threatening event, but there were far more life changes typical of near-death experiencers described in other research among those that actually had a near-death experience. So it certainly looks like it's the near-death experience and not just the life-threatening event that accounts for the preponderance of the changes seen after a near-death experience. So I think that's pretty well established.
Okay.
I'm glad that Dr. Worley agrees that the near-death experience itself can have such profound changes. Once again, I have confidence in people that they're not going to make huge, substantial life changes unless they're comfortable and clear that they're making changes in response to a real event. That's what near-death experiencers almost consistently believe, and I'm certain that's why they have such a major factor why they have such profound positive life changes.
Yeah, there did seem to be a certain degree of circular logic in his argument in saying that, well, maybe it's the NDE, even though it's hallucinatory, that's causing this life change. It's like, I don't know how you get out of that circle there then.
Yeah, people in general, all other hallucinatory events, dreams, all other temporary, transient, even pathological alterations of consciousness are essentially never going to result in that high a percentage of people experiencing them go on and have those types of profound life changes that we see in near-death experiencers. And moreover, what you see in the life changes of near-death experiencers is markedly consistent. In other words, it's not just that they have life changes, it's the consistency of those life changes. In other words, the substantial majority, if not overwhelming majority, of near-death experiencers believe that there's an afterlife. They believe that there's a God. They no longer fear death, less materialistic, value-loving relationships more, and the list goes on and on. Consistently observed not only in the INDERF study, but from scores of prior scholarly studies of this phenomenon over 30 years.
Here's the last point that I guess I wanted to talk about, because it's the capstone on this whole thing, and we were chatting a little bit about it before the interview began, and that's that how do you come to terms with the evidence? The way I always think of it is jump over that chasm, because you're a non-believer and you have this kind of materialistic world and things work out the way you like them to. But at some point, some of us, and I've gone through this process, and I can't tell you how many folks I've spoken with who said, I was very skeptical, I was there, and then at some point, I just became convinced by the evidence. And it's like jumping over this chasm and nothing ever looks the same. And this, I guess, is really what Skeptiko is all about. For me, that transformation came about through the cumulative effect of just looking at the data. I didn't have any big experience. I just kept looking at the data. And I think in the prior interview I had with you, you mentioned that your path wasn't too dissimilar from that. I mean, it was really the data that convinced you rather than, you didn't have an NDE or no one close to you had an NDE. So do you want to speak to that process of change that you've seen people go through?
Oh, absolutely. As a physician that fights cancer, I'm very evidence-based. And in fact, I require strong evidence before I'm going to make any therapeutic decisions in my professional life. And for my understanding of near-death experience, I had exactly the same standards. I'm a real show-it-to-me kind of person anyway. So I really had to see evidence and had to see overwhelmingly strong evidence before I was going to be convinced. And with the evidence that I've presented in the book, Evidence of the Afterlife, to me and to vast numbers of other people, and believe me, I've received hundreds of correspondences, and certainly that seems to be a very strong consensus among people that have read the book, is that the evidence is compelling for the reality of near-death experience and its consistent message of an afterlife. For me, I am absolutely clear, absolutely certain that there's a wonderful afterlife for all of us. And
what do you think about folks that you run into that just can't seem to get there, can't seem to really get there with regard to the evidence? Any thoughts on that? Because I know you've encountered plenty of them.
Yeah, and that was brought out with your interview with Dr. Worley, where you would consistently bring up evidence that Dr. Worley simply would not address. I think one of the biggest offense types of things that people have that don't believe in an afterlife and don't believe this kind of evidence is there's sort of that barrier where they just won't hear it. They won't respond to it. It's just not something that they care to address, which is somewhat surprising. I think all scholarly discussion of really any topic really requires a open-minded dialogue about the evidence. It really starts with evidence. So I think that's where part of it is. I think the other issue I've seen with other skeptics, and again talking in general about skeptics in general from a variety of paranormal experiences, is they really, they'll often have their pet theory, and their theory is how the world works, how things work, and it's very, very difficult to dislodge them from whatever their pet theory might be, even in the face of overwhelming evidence. And Alex, that's why there's over 20 different skeptical so-called explanations of near-death experience. The reason that there are so many so-called explanations is that no one or several of these alternative explanations make sense, even to the skeptics. And you actually have a great case report on that right on Skeptiko. Note when we interviewed Kevin Nelson, who had his theory for near-death experience, that being REM intrusion, notice not once did he mention how chest compressions might cause consciousness that lead to near-death experiences resulting. Just talked about REM intrusion, but notice that Dr. Worley never once mentioned anything about REM intrusion, and he simply had his pet theory about chest compression. So this is kind of an interesting thing. I think skeptics can fairly easily see the logical flaws and the inadequacy of other skeptics' theories in explaining the evidence, but they seem to cling rigorously to their own theory. It's a very interesting phenomenon. I've seen this over and over.
That is a very interesting point, and you could even go one step further when we interviewed Dr. Michael Persinger, and his pet theory, if you will, were that EEG didn't actually measure brain activity, and that was easily refuted, and then no one else would even go there because it doesn't make a lot of sense. But you talk there for a minute about skeptics, and what is particularly fascinating to me about the NDE experience and the NDE research is that it generates an equally unexplainable ability to kind of look past the data from people we normally associate with as being believers. And that's what I saw with your interview with Bill O'Reilly. Here's a guy who wants to come out right up front and says, I'm a Catholic. I know your data can't be right because it doesn't fit with my belief system over there. And I've interviewed some folks too, some Christian folks, very, likable folks, and you get to the NDE data and they get halfway there, only to the part that supports what they already believe. They say, I believe the NDE shows that there's heaven and God and Jesus is there. Please don't show me any data that would suggest there's anything different than that.
Yeah, I got to jump in on that. First of all, with regards to Bill O'Reilly, he is just a brilliant, tough interview person. Bill O'Reilly actually loved the interview. He told me that he'd read Evidence of the Afterlife, and I believe it. What's interesting is after the Bill O'Reilly show, he posted my interview on his website as the first video out of 20. Everybody accessing his website automatically started my interview with him playing, and the heading that was put by, presumably with Bill O'Reilly's permission or with somebody in charge of the website was words to the effect of, new book provides strong evidence of an afterlife. So again, sometimes you have to, overlook the actual interview and realize that really obviously made a very great impression, and certainly Bill O'Reilly was a lot more affected by the book than the interview might have represented. The other thing that's interesting is that here in Houma, which is a religious conservative area of the country, very, very deep south, the people that are aware of my book and have read it are absolutely fascinating. I mean, almost uniformly, people are that have read the book and understand the evidence are getting that this is an important contribution to the afterlife, to understanding the afterlife question. It's been I think, a shift in that over the last few years. In fact, I was recently talking with Dr. Raymond Moody, who first coined the term near-death experience in 1975 in his groundbreaking book, Life After Life, and he agrees. Both of us are seeing over the last few years a real shift, a real openness for people really of all religious backgrounds to really be a lot more open to the evidence of near-death experience than ever before. Now, atheists still, of course, are going to have a huge problem with it, but virtually everybody else seems to be very, very open.
I think that's probably true, but there is a lot of shading of the experience where they take in as much only that part that doesn't conflict with, where they're coming from. I don't know if you've encountered that, but I certainly had. I interviewed not too long ago Dr. Gary Habermas, who is a really, really nice guy, delightful guy, authored of more than 30 books and has appeared on numerous movies and TV shows, and has done a substantial amount of research of near-death experience. But again, a guy who will only go so far as to say, yeah, I'm okay with the afterlife part, just don't tell me that it might conflict with my book, my doctrine, my very narrowly held belief.
Well, I think with anybody, and again, speaking in general, if you've got a belief system that you absolutely know is correct, then any evidence to the contrary is certainly very difficult to hear, very difficult to accept, no matter how profound the evidence is. And I think we see that over and over. And it just creates a barrier to communication. But again, I think that as time goes on, there's less and less people that are that rigidly holding on to belief systems. I think more and more people are inquiring, they're searchers. I think they're open to saying, well, what evidence is there in the world, both for and against an afterlife? And it's people like that have questions like that, inquiring minds, openness, reasonable openness, that want to know about evidence. That's where my book, Evidence of the Afterlife, comes in. Dr.
Long, what's coming up for you in the near future?
Well, just going to think about doing a second book, given the tremendous response to my first book and the fact it became a New York Times bestseller. I'm really starting to look into near-death experiences deeper, and I'm starting to look at the experiences that are related to near-death experiences. And certainly I've got a mammoth amount of data, and I think the time over the next probably several years is going to come along where I'm going to want to start writing that down, and that will be another very interesting, very exciting book as well.
Great. Well, thank you so much for coming back on and dealing with this topic in such depth. For those of us who really like to look at the science and tear things apart logically, it's been a great help.
Well, appreciate the kind words, and I certainly enjoy talking with you, certainly have a great deal of respect for the work you're doing, and think of all of us working together. I think over time we're going to help have some of these important truths and important understandings brought to the world.
Thanks again to Dr. Long for joining me today on Skeptiko. Now that I've gotten his responses, I'm going to go back to Dr. Worley and see if any further follow-up discussion is possible or would be meaningful. So please stick around for that. And if you're interested in this show, any of the previous shows, please check out the Skeptiko website. It's at skeptiko.com. You'll find those links to all our previous shows. There's close to 100 of them by now. You'll also find an email link for me. My Facebook link is there. You can connect with me that way. And a link to our forums where you can join in a discussion about some of the topics you've heard about. Well, that's going to do it for today. I have several other episodes, quite a few actually, building up in the hopper, and I'm just trying to get those out as quickly as I can. So stick around, much more to come. Until next time, bye for now.